and I'll remind you to remain under oath. And Mr. Parker, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Judge. Okay, Doctor, I'd like to turn your attention to page 3 of your report. I think you testified earlier that you spent approximately 19 hours with Mr. Sowell during the testing.
Yes.
Okay. Was there anyone else present in the room where you were conducting the testing?
Not during any of the testing. I believe that you introduced me to Mr. Sowell, but no one was there present for the testing.
And was Mr. Sowell informed of the nature and purpose of the evaluation?
He was.
And the limits on the confidentiality and privilege?
Yes.
And he was told he was required to put forth good effort. Is that correct?
He was, yes.
And he agreed to the evaluation.
He did.
Now, the next section of your report is called Relevant Background. Can you just recap for us on page 3 and 4 what you wrote concerning the relevant background information you obtained from Mr. Sowell during the interview?
I asked him information about his family and background, so he talked to me about his mother, his father, where they worked, things like that. He was also raised by his stepfather and described that, where they lived.
Doctor, if you could, perhaps if you could just, at the bottom of page 3, read what you wrote down concerning the relevant background. Beginning with the following information.
Okay. The following information was obtained during the interview of Mr. Sowell. Anthony Edward Sowell was born on August 19th, 1959 in Cleveland, Ohio, the only child of Thomas Sowell and Claudia Benson Sowell Garrison. Mr. Sowell's parents divorced in the 1960s. His father died in April 2003, possibly secondary to a stroke. His mother is living at her home in Cleveland. Thomas Sowell was a self-employed home repairman. Mr. Sowell's mother worked as a spotter for a dry cleaner until he was 13 years old when she began working for Republic Steel. He recalls going to her workplace at the dry cleaning business many times. He also recalled his mother coming home from the steel company where she shoveled coal covered in black coal dust. Mr. Sowell has 4 siblings on his father's side and 3 half-siblings on his mother's side.
At the bottom there, is that 4 half-siblings on his father's side?
4 half-siblings.
Okay, and 3 half-siblings on his mother's side.
That's correct.
If you could go to the next page, page 4.
Mr. Sowell was raised by his mother and stepfather, Theodore Ted Garrison. Mr. Sowell reported that his stepfather, quote, was a good man, end quote, who, quote, treated me like his own son, end quote. The only time he recalled his stepfather striking him was when Mr. Sowell was about 4 or 5 years old, and he was spanked for having coughed without covering his mouth. The family lived on East 88th Street in Cleveland with his grandmother. The family also had an apartment over a store that they ran. To care for Mr. Sowell, he was frequently left on his own. There were other times that Mr. Sowell helped in the store selling candy and potato chips.
If you could just continue.
Mr. Sowell described his mother as being overprotective. He related that, quote, he couldn't have friends, quote, end quote, and stated that, in fact, quote, I didn't have one friend, end quote. He added, quote, I wasn't allowed to associate with children my age, end quote. He further described his mother saying, quote, she was kind of hard, end quote, and added, quote, don't think she intentionally treated me bad. She wanted me to be a strong male, but she went about it wrong, end quote. Mr. Sowell apparently had little contact with his biological father, Thomas Sowell, until about age 12. Prior to that age, he knew him primarily from going to his door and picking up money for his mother. At 12, Mr. Sowell felt that he began to know his father better because his father began to take him to his work and see him on his birthdays. Mr. Sowell divorced in 1985. He has a daughter, aged 28, from a previous relationship.
Why is it important for you to gather information such as this for your report?
Well, it kind of gives me context for the person's life and experiences.
And I believe the next section on your report is entitled Educational and Occupational History, is that correct?
Yes.
If you could just go through paragraph by paragraph and summarize the information that you have concerning his educational and occupational history.
In terms of education, he completed the 12th grade but was not allowed to graduate because he hadn't taken a mandatory health education class.